Let's keep the conversation going now. Joining us is Australia's Special Envoy to Combat Antisemitism, Jillian Segal. Jillian, thank you so much for your time this morning. So, in your view, was the PM slow to react or respond?
Well, I think the important thing is to focus on what he has announced. We can look at the past and say, oh, it was quick or it was slow. But the announcement of this task force, I think, is incredibly important because it is an important recognition that there has to be a specialist group collated, I think, from around the country, state and federal, focused on anti-Semitism, almost like a flying squad of experts coming in, investigating incidents, and hopefully bringing those responsible to justice. And I think that's the really important thing, because what we've seen, I think, that has been slow in this country is the policing, in the sense that the police have kept the peace, but they haven't really investigated incidents and brought those perpetrators to justice.
Don't they have to be directed from the top, though, above them, in some occasions, particularly like this one on Friday?
Of course. Well, of course, it is part of the sentiment of the direction that they get from the politicians of the day. But we're talking state and federal. And I think that's the issue here, coming together so that there's nothing between them. And what I'm also hoping for, and I've conveyed this, that this task force of police officers and investigators and crime specialists should also be linked to prosecutors, or at least get advice from prosecutors, so that we not only see people arrested or retained, detained, but we do see prosecutions, because we have a raft of legislation in this country that both state and federal governments have passed. And, you know, full credit because they've responded to situations, but we haven't tested the law. And that's what we need to do, because everyone needs to understand there are boundaries to what is acceptable behaviour. And if those boundaries are crossed, there are consequences.
Jillian, in your discussions with the Prime Minister since Friday, did you advise him to at least get there earlier or suggest what he was doing wasn't enough?
No, I spoke to the Prime Minister on Saturday, on the weekend, and I communicated with him and with other ministers. And this idea of a police task force was what we discussed, what I put to him. And I think they've obviously evolved it. They had to go through the security processes of cabinet. But I think that they've come up with, hopefully, a very useful next step. And we need to see how it works, and we need to see results. I think it's, you know, time for action, and that's what we are hopefully going to see. But
would you have suggested, though, I mean, it was there, it was here on First Edition, it was everywhere on Friday through Saturday, you know, claims of a possible terror attack. You have the Jewish community absolutely in pain, not just in Melbourne, but around the country as well. Did you suggest to him, hey, PM, I think you've got to go to Melbourne?
I actually didn't suggest that to him, because obviously it's for him to determine his travel schedule and his people. But I do think he put out two very important statements of concern and sympathy and empathy to the community. And I know that that is not enough, and the community did want to see him. And I think it's great that he's going today. I mean, I think this is an ongoing trauma. And we have to kind of understand that there are many calls on his time. It's important that he does go, and I think he will be. My understanding is that he will be going today. So
how do you feel about this travel warning overnight, Jillian, where Jewish people have been advised not to travel here for non-essential trips?
Well, I think it is very concerning, but it's not the first time. There have been previous travel warnings in relation to what's happening in Australia. And I think it's a reflection of the fact that anti-Semitism at this stage, really for some time in Australia, has been at an unacceptable level. And it's political leadership, but it's also, we've seen over the year, a lack of university leadership. I'm pleased to say that those university leaders are now very focused on changing things, turning things around, putting in place better policies, training, and having a university sector that is much more welcoming to everyone next year. We have a long way to go, but it's a whole of society thing. We have to say, as a community, as political leaders, as business leaders, as university leaders, that it is unacceptable that we have weekly protests taking over our cities, that we can allow protests outside or gatherings outside places of worship. That should be banned. And that we should have restrictions, I believe, on where these demonstrations take place.
So when you say, and I have to close here because I'm out of time, but when you say there's multiple failures across the board here, how much of a role is the government playing in all of this? And we can put the federal and state governments together, in particular in Victoria. Is it because, and the rise of anti-Semitism here in the country, which is completely out of control, and you're right, it is unacceptable, but do you put it down to this vote against Israel at the UN? Or do you put it down to this placing of a moral equivalence between anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, which are just not at the same levels? The firebombing on Friday proved that.
Well, Pete, I think anti-Semitism is an age-old hatred that is like a virus, and it morphs depending on the times and the circumstances, and everything contributes to it. Okay, it's complicated. It's not one thing, but it is a mixture of rhetoric, the legal regime, police enforcement, what is tolerated. And I do think I go back to October 9 in front of the Sydney Opera House, where that was accepted. A group of people burning the Israeli flag, saying F the Jews, and nothing happened. And the Jewish community of Sydney was asked to stay away. Now that set the tone that we have to change around the country. Jewish people are integral to the life of Australia amongst the First Fleet, and we need to all feel safe in this country, all groups. Yep. And the community has to support that, as well as our political leadership.
That's Jillian Segal there. Appreciate your time, Jillian. Thank you.